is at the core of this panel. It's a great panel. I'll come back to that. But we are faced in many ways with the triangle. And one is energy access. There is close to 800 million people on our planet that don't have access to basic electricity. Let's not forget that. And then in Europe, we have learned a lot about energy security also the last year. So you will have to have predictability when it comes to energy. And the third part of the triangle is decoupling. How can we reach all this and continue development, but also reaching the international agreements that we have made in Paris and lately now at COP28 in Dubai. How to square a circle or maybe square a triangle, I don't know. At least I'll leave this to the panel. That is great. His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz has been such a great supporter of our summit. Thank you, Your Highness. He's also asked as the host to speak last, so just so you know, I'm not bypassing His Highness, but it's on his request. But we will come back to you, Your Highness. And we have from the left here for you, we have Darren Woods, Chairman and CEO of ExxonMobil. Welcome. We have then Vicky Holub, President and CEO of Occidental. And then we have His Excellency Saad bin Sharida Al-Kabi, Minister of State for Energy Affairs of Qatar. And then we have Kadri Simpson, Commissioner for Energy, European Commission. So this will be a very interesting and important discussion. Let me start with you, Darren Woods. How is it possible to make sure that we are able to secure security for energy, that we are able to reach those that don't have energy, making sure that energy is also underpinning the necessary economic growth that we need, but also then meeting the international obligations and decouple this from growth in greenhouse emissions. Is there a path for this, and is Exxon on that path?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say I think the good news is this is not the first time the world has faced challenges or issues that are multidimensional that you have to take into account and address a number of competing interests. I think it is unique in that we are attempting to do it at a scale that in the past has never been attempted, and we're attempting to do it in an area that is so critically important to people's lifestyles, their prosperity, and the importance of it to economic growth. So that makes it particularly challenging. But I would say, you know, we have approached this in the past. Society has. Different countries have approached this as a one-dimensional problem that has frankly been translated from reducing emissions to reducing oil and gas. And I think we've gotten very fixated on a very narrow solution set and put in policies around the world to try to address that very narrow solution set, and we're beginning to see the consequences of that. And so my view is we need to step back and focus, one, on the problem statement, which is emissions, and then start thinking at a very global level, how do you address reductions in emissions? And the good news is we have done things like this in the past across the globe. And the first thing we need to address is a mechanism and method for accounting for emissions. We today, the world, no country has a mechanism in place to actually account for carbon emissions. So if you can't measure it, you sure can't manage it. So start with understanding and have a globally accepted carbon accounting system in place. And once you have a carbon accounting system in place, you can begin to put policy in place to address the carbon emissions associated with any product that society makes through carbon intensity specifications. The beauty of that is you don't have to have the answer. You're not focusing on a way of getting to an answer, but instead you're focused on the outcome that you're after. And you let the markets, academia, technology, businesses, governments focus on how best to achieve the outcome. That unleashes the power of capital markets and focuses on an objective and doesn't require policymakers to try to come up with an answer on their own, but instead focus on delivering a solution. And this, fortunately, is how we've managed many other parameters that we've tried to control with different products. So think of lead in gasoline, think of sulfur emissions and diesel. There's a number of examples around the world and around a lot of different products that we've already managed to make improvements through a more rational, objective process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to move to Kadri Simpson, Commissioner for Energy of the EU. EU has been through quite a transformation. 40% of the natural gas that was consumed came from Russia. From one day to another, most of that gas was gone. You pivoted into LNG, both from Qatar, the US, but you also started a process of rolling out then renewables. Listening then to Mr. Woods, but also your experience now, where do you see the energy future of the European Union and still staying competitive?
Thank you for your question, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your kind invitation. It's a pleasure to attend today's special meeting. And indeed, it was just a couple of months ago when the European Union was able to announce that we are exiting from the crisis mode. So for a couple of years, our citizens and our industry, they had to face very high energy prices, and on top of that, there was, especially during the winter season, a concern: do we have enough natural gas at our disposal to heat our homes? And now, 2 years since Russia started to manipulate our gas market, we can say that our underground gas storages are sufficiently full, and prices are down to pre-war level. So I do remember that in 2021, when we saw first signs that Russia was manipulating our markets, I was visiting Qatar, and we did a very intensive outreach to find alternative suppliers. It was a challenging task, but luckily we had already an impressive network of LNG terminals built out across Europe. So indeed, we managed to diversify our supplies. And saying that, it was a surprise for many member states that one dominant supplier can cut you out like this, because pipeline gas interconnections, they were built during Soviet era. They connected more than a dozen member states in Europe with Russian gas fields. And this situation that we were left without Russian natural gas was not the result of our sanctions. On the contrary, it was their unilateral decision to create difficulties, political difficulties for our governments. But then, of course, like we already found out in 2021, it was impossible to replace 155 billion cubic meters overnight with LNG. No LNG producer was able to increase their production in such a short notice. So we had also to implement emergency measures, and we requested our governments to cut gas consumption. They did so. They cut their gas consumption across the board by 18%. How was it possible? So 1/3 of our gas consumption is due to the fact that we heat our homes. So that we had to continue. We were not able to announce that people will freeze. Another 30% goes to power generation, and there we made a difference. We brought online very fast renewables. Past 2 years have been record years for renewables. Only last year we brought online 73 gigawatts of new wind and solar installations that helped us to cut gas significantly. And that brought prices down. And this is a clear signal that our investors, when they had the opportunity to make investment decisions, prioritize renewables. Of course, we have to invest also our taxpayers' money to build up the grid infrastructure. We plan to do so. Just last year, we presented our grid's action plan. And this covers not only our mainland infrastructure, but we will also connect offshore wind farms. We plan to bring online 111 gigawatts of new offshore wind power generation. And as you know, the biggest offshore windmills are as tall as Eiffel Tower, 280 meters, if you also take into account the subsea foundations. They produce, well, they are 15 megawatts, so they produce as much as 20,000 households need. So we call our sea basins, North Sea and Baltic Sea, our future green power plants. And this is a promising development. This is something that we can also advise other governments to follow. And clearly, I trust private investors. I do see that this is the sector where they direct their investments.
What do you say to those in the European saying that LNG and natural gas is not environmentally friendly? Do you say that this is a necessary bridge, or how do you address that?
Indeed, for us, natural gas right now plays a very important role for many member states. Natural gas power plants are the ones who help us to cover peak demand when there is not sufficient wind or solar. Of course, we are also privileged to have a vast potential of hydro reservoirs at our disposal, but the most difficult year, summer 2022, we saw that there was a drought in Iberian Peninsula, and this created on top of Russian manipulation, a very difficult situation. Now, on gas, we just presented our 2040 targets. European Union will cut CO2 emissions by 90%, and that means that only renewables, well, this clearly will not be sufficient. So we also brought online carbon capture and storage strategy, and also new innovative solutions like SMRs. Some of our member states are very excited to bring online new nuclear, and this is totally accepted. Member states can choose their energy mix, and as you know, the commitment of ours is to become climate neutral. So all the low-carbon technologies that help us to do so are welcomed.
What do you say to the European countries that have said that they're not continuing with nuclear in this situation, on top of the situation with the Russian gas?
Well, this is mainly triggered by the public acceptance issue, and you will remember that globally there was lots of discussion after Fukushima accident. So my biggest concern is that right now Russian troops are occupying the biggest European nuclear power plant. This is Zaporozhye power plant in Ukraine, and if they will recklessly create some kind of disaster, then public opinion changes for sure.
Thank you very much. Let me then move to you, Minister of Energy of Qatar, His Excellency Al-Kaabi. Two questions. One is the global energy demand. If we now see global growth back at 3.2%, there will also be an increased demand for energy. Where do you see that energy coming from? And where do you see the role of LNG in this and the long-term prospects for Qatar? I think you're considering even increasing the production of the northern field with like 80% or something. It's on the table. So maybe you can enlighten us about those plans.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz for inviting me to attend here, and thank you and the forum, and thank everybody that's attending for attending this distinguished gathering really here. Regarding the outlook for the demand in gas, I think was your question in general, but I think energy in total. Of course, this green push that we're talking about, we're all for having a good environment for us and for our kids and next generation. So we're all responsible citizens living in this world, if you will, small world, and we all want to do what's right. The importance is to do it in a way that's responsible for this generation and next generation, and make sure that people that want to grow and countries that want to grow their economy have the same rights that the richer countries have all along, and we take everybody along for the ride. You've mentioned 800 million people not having basic electricity. I think the number is more like 1 billion or whatever. And if we think about another 1.5 billion to 2 billion joining us in the next 30 years or so, you need power for additional 2 billion people coming on Earth. So I think we shouldn't be selfish and just talking about what we want in our house and forget the neighborhood, if you will. The way it has been pushed that, demonizing oil and gas all along for the past almost decade now, and really putting the oil and gas sector as if we are not doing good for humanity, and everybody that's green is trying to push that narrative and so on. I think now everybody's turning to understand that there is a need for oil and gas for the long term. And the people that were saying we need green hydrogen, blue ammonia, green ammonia, whatever, nobody is coming up and saying we can pay the price for that. A lot of governments are talking about green initiatives, but they actually are not paying for it. And ultimately, you have consumers that will be paying for all these green initiatives, and they will not be able to afford it, even in richer countries. The demand, I think, for oil is going to be there for a very long time. You need petrochemicals that wind farms and solar energy cannot produce, so you need petrochemical plants, you need all the refined chemicals and so on that you will need for a very long time. Gas is going to be needed to power really all the electricity that's needed for the expansions, urea and ammonia that's used for fertilizers, and as mentioned by my colleague here, for the intermittency of solar and wind. So oil and gas are going to be needed for a very long time. You can debate, when you speak oil, when you speak gas, but that's irrelevant in my view. The important thing is we all do it in a responsible way. And if you look at everybody that's here in the panel, whether it's my colleagues from the American companies, His Royal Highness Aramco here in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in Qatar and around the world, everybody is doing their best in emissions, in methane abatement, in spending billions in carbon capture and sequestration. So everybody's doing it in a very responsible way to make sure that we can develop and have growth for humanity in a way that is very responsible. And I think we're not being given enough credit for doing all that. And as mentioned by Darren, there isn't a real mechanism to have a proper accounting that we all have a benchmark and everybody is really judged on the same basis, if you will. You have different institutions, EIA and whoever just puts out numbers, and most of it is politically driven.
Is the elephant in this room the coal?
No, coal. I think you see, replacing coal with gas and power cuts your CO2 into half. But also, I think we should be reducing coal in a big way. But also, as we are defending the gas and the oil that's needed for a very long time, you also need to do it in a responsible way for the countries that cannot afford to do it that quickly. So countries need time also to wane off coal. And I think if they do it in a responsible way and then slowly, get off coal, I think that's also very important, because that's an immediate solution where you cut off coal, you reduce your CO2 emissions. But I think the demand is going to be there for a very, very long time, and way, way beyond a lot of the projections that people are talking about. Most of the discussion is driven by political drives for elections.
But
that's the bottom line in my view.
If the demand for coal continues, how will we then be able to meet the commitments from COP28 in Dubai?
Sorry, again?
How can we meet the commitments from COP28 in Dubai if coal continues to grow?
I think you have seen that coal has been on a record pace. So I think you can't meet it if coal continues in the same pattern.
So Darren has asked for a short...
Just a clarification.
Yeah.
The Dubai COP28 talk about unabated coal, the phasing out of unabated coal. So abated coal is virtuous.
Thank you for that very important clarification, Your Highness. I'll go then a short response from Darren, and I'll go to Vicky Holub. So, Darren.
Well, I just wanted to comment on the elephant in the room, which I think is, it's not coal per se, it's cost. And I think one of the challenges associated with, again, how society's been advancing this is we've taken very small sample sizes and extrapolated to very large problem sets. And the reason why coal continues to be a dominant energy source today around the world is because of the cost advantages associated with that, and the fact that developing nations and people who are trying to raise themselves and their prosperity levels require cheap energy, and coal is a source of that. So the elephant in the room is, how do we address the cost? And we're not going to do it by focusing on an isolation, one or two solutions. Instead, it's trying to engage the broader capital markets, broader technology set to find ways to start reducing cost so that you can reduce emissions, as His Excellency said, responsibly. And part of responsible emission reduction is doing it affordably so that nations can do that. I would just make one point with respect to Europe and the response to the high prices. There was luck involved in this, in that there were two very warm winters which allowed the demand for gas to be low, and that allowed inventories to build, which was fortunate for the people of Europe. A price that's been paid but hasn't been fully recognized yet is deindustrialization of Europe, and the fact that many companies are going out of business, and it's very difficult to compete on the world markets with a lot of the policies that are being, prescriptive policies that are being put in place in Europe. And the cost of that will begin to manifest itself over time. And so huge implications to addressing this huge challenge. But we've got to start doing some real math, looking at the cost, extrapolating and understanding the total problem set rather than very micro. And I think, to His Excellency's point, we've got to stop the propaganda and the politics and get down, rolling our sleeves up, and the world needs to develop a realistic plan for making progress in this space.
If it's okay, Vicky, can the Commissioner just comment shortly on that? She's asked for the floor before, but you will have ample time together with His Highness. Commissioner, just a short response to that, if you want.
Thank you, Borg, and be aware that each time when you mention Europe, I have to reply. But first I wanted to mention that on coal, well, this night I will take overnight flight back to Italy because we will have G7 energy ministers meeting, and one issue that we will discuss there again is how to avoid new investments into coal production, because we are very much aware that in Europe the coal-fired power plants are already nearing their end of life cycle. So we ask some power plants that are as old as 40, 50, 60 years old to retire. This is a normal thing to do. But in Asia, the average age of a coal power plant is 13, so you ask teenagers to retire. And this is a different challenge. Of course, we have to help these nations to replace most polluting alternatives with cleaner ones. And this is the reason why European Union championed a global pledge to triple renewables by 2030, because according to our understanding, renewables are already the most cost-efficient way to produce electricity. What is happening in Europe, since we announced our Green Deal, we do see that our Green Deal is also our growth strategy. So indeed, first mover advantage is something that our businesses are grasping. And this is also covered with our Net Zero Industry Act. So we do have 12 promising new clean tech solutions where we will invest some of our research and innovation funds, but also we will support European producers. So the very moment when there is a concern that we cannot compete with American companies due to the fact that we don't produce gas, natural gas ourselves, but Americans to cover their domestic demand, we have to be innovative and opt for homegrown alternatives. This is what we are doing.
Thank you. And before coming to you, Vicky, I tried with one theory on elephants in the room, coal. Darren said cost. Could I also launch a third candidate, and that is subsidies? Well, we do know that coal is heavily subsidized in many countries. There's more taxpayers money going to subsidizing coal than it's for energy transition. But well, let's keep those elephants there, and you feel free to comment on them or even launch new elephants. Vicky, over to you.
Okay, so I'm not going to launch any elephants, I hope, but I'll address the ones that are already in the room. And that is, I agree with Darren that there has to be a mechanism in place that drives the incentive for the whole world to respond to the situation that we're in. And we're certainly in a dire situation because of the fact that some are distracting the world from the real problem. And the real problem is that we have to decarbonize oil, because it doesn't really matter how you look at it. Wind and solar are fine for generating electricity, but wind and solar are not going to be the answer for aviation and maritime and trucking and people, especially those people in Texas who want to drive their trucks everywhere. Every family has multiple vehicles, and EVs are not the first two. EVs are usually a third choice, and they're the fun choice. They're not the choice that really provides the means to get around. That may change over time, but that's not changing very quickly in the U.S. So the situation we're in, to me, is while we're working policy and while we're working the incentives, we have to work the technology. We can't push that out. And so I think that our industry has faced big challenges before. We've always been able to step up and address those challenges. We've done it with the development of 3D seismic, with enhanced oil recovery. We've done it with within the United States, when our production dropped down to less than 6 million barrels a day. The shale revolution took over. It took 10 years to make that work. And so now it's going to take us some time to make direct air capture work and to make some of the carbon capture on point sources work. But the way we view it at Oxy is that even if you stopped all the emissions from every industrial site around the world, you still need to reduce CO2 out of the atmosphere. And the strategy that we're pushing and hoping the industry will adopt, and I know some are adopting it now and starting to execute a plan to do it, and that is to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, use it in enhanced oil recovery in the reservoirs that we have today. It's a way to generate net zero oil, which then generates net zero fuels for maritime and aviation and gasoline. Also, that would be a lower emission source of oil, too, because the infrastructure would already be installed. So there are multiple ways that generating net zero oil could be a solution for our industry and could be adopted as we advance the technology. And just as wind and solar took about a decade to drop their cost dramatically, I think the challenge for us is dropping the cost of direct air capture. I believe with the aid of digital twins and computing power that we have today, when wind and solar did not have that same tool available to them, I think that we can drop the cost. We're building a facility that will extract 500,000 tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere in the Permian in the United States. And we're already, before we even start the third and fourth train, we're already seeing a improvement in technology. We're seeing that AI is also a help to make that happen. So I believe direct air capture has to work. There's also a revolutionary technology to generate electrical power, and it's called, in the United States, net power. It's something that combusts hydrocarbon gases with oxygen instead of air, so there are no volatile organic emissions, and it captures the CO2 in fresh water as a part of the chemical reaction. So instead of a user of water, it's a provider of water. And the CO2 drives the turbine to create the electricity and then captures off the side a stream of CO2 that can then be used in enhanced oil recovery. So looking at a circular system here where you could actually have the ability to continue to produce oil and gas, the lowest cost, highest intensity fuel in the world, and do it in a way that helps you to get more oil out of the reservoirs we're producing today, that in the end creates the economics that will work to make that a viable solution so that we don't have to discontinue oil. It becomes an emission-free part of the energy mix.
Thank you. Do you want to comment now, Your Highness?
No, I thought you were going to ask me something.
Yeah, I will ask you a question. So,
I like this.
me
elephant.
too. I thought it was very interesting. I was tempted to ask Darren and the minister if they share this vision of the decarbonized oil and CO2 out of the atmosphere. And dropping costs like we've seen on solar in these areas. Is this decarbonized oil, Your Highness, is that a vision you share with Vicky?
If you can move the questions to Darren and Saad, and then I will.
Okay, so Darren.
I'm enjoying somebody's doing the homework on my behalf. So
Darren, you heard Vicky decarbonizing oil. She's putting a lot of money into carbon capture and storage to try to see if we could see the same development there as we saw for solar, fell to 1/10 of the price, and also capturing CO2 from the atmosphere. Are you sharing this vision, and are you optimistic that we can see this kind of breakthroughs? And I'll have that question to Darren, and then to His Excellency, and then we'll see what His Royal Highness thinks.
So I think technology is needed. Advancements in technology and breakthroughs in technology are going to play a very important role here. I would say that to date, there hasn't been enough work done in that space or enough incentives for people to make the kind of advances that the world needs, but it is starting, and I know Vicky's working in that space. ExxonMobil has a brand new technology that we're working on, trying to drive the cost of direct air capture down. There are many other companies doing that. And so I think the good news is there is work going on in this space, in the technology space. The bad news is the costs remain today, I think, prohibitively high. You can apply it in very small applications, oftentimes at high prices. And the challenge is, how do you develop a technology that you can broadly distribute to deal with the issue across the world? And so I do think it's going to be important. It comes back to the point I was making before. We shouldn't be focused on the molecules of hydrogen and carbon and that go into crude oil. We should instead be focused on the emissions. Oil is going to be around for a long time. People have to remember that the issue that we're trying to deal with is the combustion of oil products. So combustion and the emissions associated with it. Deal with the emissions, you can still combust. Even without combustion of oil products, today, oil goes into, and if you look at the demand for growth for oil going forward, it goes into chemical products that are absolutely essential to modern life. That's not going to go away. And so the idea that you're going to eliminate oil and gas, I think, from the equation in total, I just think isn't based on the reality of the molecules of those feedstocks and what they go into to support the standards of living that everyone around the world is either enjoying or aspiring to. And so you've got to find a technology to address the emissions. So I'm very aligned with Vicky in terms of that opportunity set. I think the challenge is, at what stage does society make the breakthroughs and how far can we get the cost down? But you won't make progress if you don't get started. And I think that's the message that Vicky has. That's the message that I have.
So, Minister.
Yeah, I'll maybe tackle the second part of the CO2, which is the capturing from actual production. I think the direct capture was one. I think Darren covered it very well. On the capture of CO2 from our production, if you look at what we've done in Qatar, we've been injecting 2.5 million tons of CO2 that we're capturing from our facilities in LNG since 2015, 2.5 million tons per annum. So before anybody was talking about CO2 sequestration or capture, we were already doing it. In our production increase that we're going to have, we're actually in construction today to go from 77 million tons to 126 million tons. We've announced also going on another phase to 142, but just in the first phase of development to 126, we're going to